Early September 1944, the Allied armies reached the original border of Germany. Although many of his generals think that everything is over and that Germany is going to surrender imminently, his worst battles are yet to come, such as the one that will take place in the infernal Hürtgen Forest. From north to south, the deployment of the Allied armies was as follows. The 1st Canadian Army was facing Holland. To his right, the British 2nd Army occupied the city of Antwerp in northern Belgium. Next was the American 9th Army, and a little further south, just in front of Aachen and Hürtgen Forest, was the American 1st Army, with Patton's 3rd Army on its right flank. In front of them were the 15th German Army, the 1st Airborne, General Brandenberger's 7th Army in the vicinity of Aachen, and further south, the 1st, 5th, and 9th German Army. Having advanced at full speed through France since mid-August, the Allies were at the edge of their logistical capacity and could only continue advancing towards Germany by one sector. The first option was to do it through Holland. The second was to pass through the natural corridor of Stolberg, just south of Aachen, and the third was to do so through the Rhineland region, right through the sector where Patton was. After many discussions, Montgomery's plan was finally adopted, which was known as Operation Market Garden, with which the Allies tried to cross the Rhine River through Holland. With most Allied resources diverted northward, the Americans were left with just enough capacity with which to make small advances. It was under these conditions that General Hodge's 1st American Army began to approach Aquisgrán and Hürtgen Forest during the first days of September. At this time, the American objective was to overcome the city of Aachen as quickly as possible and reach the Rhine River as soon as possible. However, the resistance they began to encounter in Aachen was greater than expected, and a new threat to the south of the city forced them to divert their divisions. The Stolberg corridor, through which they had to make their way to the Rhine, was flanked by the city of Aachen in the north and the Hürtgen Forest in the south. One of the greatest fears of General Collins, who commanded the 7th Army Corps, which included the 1st and 9th Infantry Divisions and the 3rd Armored Division, was that his armored division would be attacked from Hürtgen Forest while it was opening a pass through the Stolberg corridor. Thus, while the 1st and 30th Infantry Divisions were busy conquering Aachen, Collins decided to send his 9th Infantry Division towards Hürtgen Forest to reconnoiter and secure the terrain. Unknowingly, it would become one of the worst decisions of the American Army in World War II. Within the Hürtgen Forest were the remains of the German 275th Infantry Division, which had been retreating from Normandy, where it had been practically annihilated. The American 9th Division entered the Hürtgen Forest between September 12 and 14, thinking that there would be hardly any German defenders and that in a few days they would be able to secure the position and protect the southern flank of the 3rd Armored Division, which should move down the corridor. The assault on the forest began between September 12 and 14, at the same time that they were also advancing on Aachen. Little by little, many casualties occurred until a stalemate was reached at the end of September, in which the Americans were forced to stop their offensive inside Hürtgen. On October 6, the 9th Division again went on the offensive, crashing again into the German wall. However, and despite the casualties they had suffered, General Collins had decided that they had to take this forest no matter what and clear it of Germans so that they would not threaten the Stolberg corridor. Despite their weakness, the Germans not only defended themselves, but attacked with their Kampfgruppe on October 12. This led to a stalemate on the 14th, after which the 9th Infantry Division no longer had the strength to continue attacking. After almost a month of bloody fighting, they only managed to advance a little in the northern part to the city Mausbach. After the war, a German officer even told them they should never have entered the Hürtgen Forest, since the Germans did not have the capacity to launch any counterattack from that sector. Instead, they should have surrounded it. The objective of the 9th American Infantry Division had been to take the town of Schmidt and the internal Hürtgen Road, which passes through the town of Hürtgen itself and reaches Doran. But after having suffered nearly 5,000 casualties during this attempt, in which they barely advanced 3 kilometers, on October 24 the division had to be withdrawn from the front to regroup. The forest will reek of death long after the last body has been removed. Some soldiers comment. To take their place, the 28th Infantry Division was sent to Hürtgen. From here, instead of giving up in the face of such stubborn German defense, the Americans sight as a danger to their flank from where they could be attacked at any moment. During this first month of fighting, the Allied generals did not want to see the great disadvantage that their troops had when attacking a forested area like Hürtgen, where their air superiority was not of much use, since they could not detect enemy movements or attack them with precision. In addition, the artillery also lost much of its effectiveness for the same reasons, and that without taking into account that the German entrenchments and fortifications provided their enemy with additional protection against the fire of the North American infantry. Finally, the attackers' armored vehicles also suffered a great loss of their combat capacity, since they lost mobility and, above all, were a much easier prey for the German anti-tank forces, especially for the infantry equipped with the fearsome Panzerfaust. Another fact to highlight, and which is curious, is that the Allied commanders were not aware at any time that the only objective of strategic value that the Hürtgen Forest hid was access to the large dams of the Ruhr. Obsessed with overcoming the defenses of the Siegfried Line and reaching Germany, the Americans did not realize that if they crossed the Hürtgen Forest, the dams that supplied most of the electricity to the Ruhr war industries would be within reach. From his hand, dealing a devastating blow to the German ability to continue the war. It would not be until much later, in December, when this objective began to appear in North American planning for new attacks. However, later, this is the reason they sold for why they were attacking, to justify their bloody operation. Collins later admitted that it was a huge failure of Allied intelligence services to have failed to detect the Ruhr dams sooner. On the other hand, the German objective of defending this forest was twofold. Firstly, they wanted to protect the dams and access to Germany, and secondly, to camouflage what was being prepared in the Ardennes, about 50 kilometers further south. The rest that the Americans gave them at Hürtgen during the last 2 weeks of October, in which they focused on taking Aachen and sending the 20th Infantry Division to the sector, was used by the Germans to reinforce their positions in the forest. Basically, they carried out work of laying mines, blocking roads, and strengthening their defensive positions. At this point, neither side knew what the other's real intention was, and in the end, they became entangled in a combat that gradually increased in intensity, without there really being anything at stake. Following the failure of the 9th Infantry Division's attack in the Hürtgen Forest, the 1st Army sector entered a period of temporary inactivity, due both to the lack of supplies and the extraordinary resistance displayed by the Germans along the entire front. To which we must add the arrival of the first autumn rains. The great hopes of ending the war before Christmas had proven excessively optimistic, and now the task remained of rethinking the strategy to finally defeat Germany. By the end of October 1944, the supply situation had improved enough for the Allied High Command to reconsider resuming a general offensive to break the German defense on the Western Front. Added to this was the arrival of replacements that had allowed the units most affected by the casualties suffered in the months of August and September to be recomposed. So there was confidence that a new blow could lead to the collapse of the German resistance. This new general attack was codified with the name Operation Queen and began to be outlined in mid-October in a meeting at Eisenhower's headquarters, attended by Marshal Montgomery and General Omar Bradley. Eisenhower was in favor of not giving the Germans any respite, so it was decided that the initial date for the attack would be November 5, taking advantage of a window of good weather that would allow intensive use of Allied air resources. However, it was considered that for Operation Queen to have greater expectations of success, the expulsion of the Germans from the Hürtgen Forest had to be completed, and in particular, the town of Schmidt, which constituted a vital communications hub to protect the flank of the Germans, had to be captured. 1st American Army, in a renewed assault through the Stolberg Corridor, General Hodges was therefore ordered to eliminate this threat by launching an attack that would capture the town and dismantle any possibility of a German counterattack force concentrating on Hürtgen. Hodges decided to transfer responsibility for the attack to General Gero's 5th Army Corps, while Collins's 7th Corps concentrated on a planned attack on the Stolberg Corridor. At this time, the Ruhr River dams had not yet been considered a target. Of the 4 divisions that the 5th Army Corps had, all were discarded for the attack except for the 20th Infantry Division. One of those that was left out of the attack was the 5th Armored Division, since it was considered that the terrain was not suitable for its tanks. In order to accomplish its mission, the 20th Division was reinforced with numerous artillery, although the danger of friendly fire increased. Additionally, many aircraft were also allocated to cut off any German reinforcements in the area. The objective was again to make their way to Hürtgen and Wassenack, and then continue south to Kahl, and then to Schmidt, to secure the junctions and roads leading to Doren. For their part, the Germans continued to defend the sector with the 275th Infantry Division, which at this time was very weakened. For the attack, the 20th Division was divided into its 3 regiments, which would each attack in a fan-shaped direction, from Hürtgen to Schmidt. This weakened them greatly, and none of their commanders thought they would be able to succeed. By the end of October, the temperatures had dropped a lot and everything was snowy. On October 29, the attack began with advance operations that cleared the German advance points. After the first skirmishes, the serious attack began on November 2 with an impressive artillery barrage that surprised even the veterans of the Eastern Front. They said that in Russia, the Soviets did not have as many mobile means and artillery. Still, the Germans were very prepared for this attack. The advance of the 20th Infantry Division was considerable, and they managed to reach Kahl and Schmidt, taking Wassenack by November 4. At the time of the attack, German Marshal Walter Model was in the area, specifically in Cologne, with all the leaders of the sector, and was able to organize various counterattacks and send reinforcement units that thwarted the Allied attack. Specifically, the German units that were going to be able to participate in the counterattack were the 116th Panzer Division, the German 89th Infantry Division, along with the 272nd Volksgrenadier. For their part, the Americans were able to concentrate, and after many efforts, they took the town of Schmidt, and thinking that everything was over, they relaxed. The new position they had conquered formed a very narrow salient, and their subsequent inactivity gave the Germans time to reorganize and counterattack throughout the American salient between November 4 and 7. In an attempt to reinforce the position they had gained in Schmidt, the Americans tried to send some tanks to the city, but they were unable to reach it due to the terrain conditions. Starting on November 4, the Germans began a strong counterattack throughout the entire sector, led by the 116th Panzer Division and the 89th Infantry Division. Faced with this pressure, the men of the 20th Infantry Division were forced to withdraw and abandon Schmidt and Kammerscheid by November 8. Due to the shock of defeat, on November 11 the death sentence was signed for an American soldier from the 20th Division, who had deserted weeks before. In total, the 20th Division suffered almost 6,000 casualties and about 50 tanks between Shermans and M10s. For their part, The Germans suffered the loss of between 3,000 men and 15 panzers during their battles with the 28th Infantry Division. Having abandoned virtually all of the territory they had gained days earlier, the surviving Americans were sent near Luxembourg to recover, but would soon find themselves in the middle of the Battle of the Bulge. After the new defeat of the American army, numerous divisions arrived in the sector with the intention of overcoming the German defenses in Hürtgen once and for all. The American generals who had just been defeated stated that the Germans in this sector were much more numerous than they had been told. For the Germans, the reasons for his triumph were explained by General Gersdorf in an interview with his American captors after the Second World War. The three main reasons for our success in this battle were the following. Firstly, the inadequacy of your supply route from Wassenack to Kammerscheid. Secondly, the availability to us of roads that could withstand an armored counterattack. And finally, the effect derived from the massive concentration of our artillery fire. Determined to overcome the German defenses, the Americans sent the 8th, 28th, and 99th Infantry Divisions to Hürtgen, along with the 2nd, 4th, and 9th Armored Divisions. In total, about 318,000 men and about 600 battle tanks. For their part, the Germans had much smaller numbers, with the depleted 275th and 89th Infantry Divisions and the 272nd and 212th Volksgrenadier. In their rear, there were the armies that were preparing for the attack in the Ardennes, but Hitler ordered that none of these units intervene, even if they had to give up ground. Trying not to get into the most rugged area of the Hürtgen Forest again, which is located near the city of Schmidt. On this occasion, the American attack was redirected towards the east in the so-called Operation Queen. Finally, on November 16, the attack began, preceded by a bombing raid similar to that of Operation Cobra, in which 2,400 bombers participated, dropping a total of 10,000 tons of bombs. As a curiosity, they had the same power as 2 atomic bombs. However, it barely had any results in the battle that was to come, because to prevent the bombs from falling on the American troops themselves, they went far behind the German lines. Roughly, they fell east of Stolberg, and the city of Doran was practically wiped off the map, with some 3,500 civilians dying in the brutal bombardment. In any case, and due to the great superiority of the 6 American divisions, the Americans managed to advance towards Germany after 5 days of furious fighting. However, the advance was only 2.5 kilometers at the cost of more than 1,500 casualties. Again, it was a complete and utter disaster. Having once again underestimated the German resistance capacity, the American offensive continued until November 21, and only the 4th Infantry Division suffered another 7,500 casualties without being able to reach the city of Doran. The only division that did well was the 3rd Armored Division, which had attacked through the Stolberg corridor and had managed to reach the city. However, the American advance was halted again during the first days of December throughout the sector. More than 70 years later, the North American insistence on frontal attacks on enemy strongpoints continues to be surprising, reminiscent, with all distances in terms of scale, of the terrible combats on the Western Front during the First World War. Operation Queen meant more than 18,000 casualties for the 7th Army Corps in just 1 month of fighting, while the blood tribute of the 5th Army Corps had been more than 7,000. Thus, several veteran Hürtgen formations were transferred to the Ardennes, as was the case with the 28th and 4th Infantry Divisions, under the belief that that area would not be attacked by the Germans. With American units exhausted, The Germans launched the offensive in the Ardennes on December 16, and all of Hürtgen's actions were immediately paralyzed. The official casualty report during the Hürtgen Forest campaign was around 35,000 casualties for the American forces, while the Wehrmacht suffered approximately 25,000 losses. The series of battles at Hürtgen remains an enigma due to the difficulty of determining why it was fought and what motivated the Americans to fight in a positional combat similar to World War I. The contradictory versions of the protagonists and the available documents make it speculative to fully understand the reasons behind the campaign. Although it was initially suspected that Hürtgen could be a concentration area for enemy forces for a flank attack against the American advance, the insistence on sending division after division into combat in the forest is difficult to understand. The Americans were fighting against their own preconceived ideas about the enemy's intentions, without paying attention to information on the ground. The German response to send combat units to Hürtgen was motivated by a misinterpretation of American intentions, believing that the ultimate objective was the capture of the Ruhr dams. The successive combats in Hürtgen showed poor planning, underestimation of the enemy, and recurring errors by the North American High Command. In this way, the campaign resulted in a terrible defeat for the North American troops, with a high cost in lives, and without achieving the desired strategic objectives. Despite the adverse conditions, the Americans persisted in believing that each new attack would be the last and decisive one, which generated the continuous sending of troops to Hürtgen. Ultimately, Hürtgen's campaign had limited impact on the German defense, and it was the failed Ardennes offensive that significantly weakened their defensive capabilities on the Western Front.